Hello, everybody. This is the podcast NGO Soul and Strategy. And today I'm going to interview Alyona Gerasimova. No, I think I'm mispronouncing it. Alyona, please give me your correct pronunciation for your last name as well.
It's Gerasimova.
Gerasimova. And Alyona is the Ukraine country director for the American-founded NGO PACT. So she's the country director for PACT Ukraine. I don't have to explain to you why we chose Ukraine as a focus in interviewing a country director like Alyona. However, please note in this podcast, we will not be talking so much about the Ukraine war, the crisis in general, the humanitarian disaster, and the misery and injustice that is going on. Instead, we will be focusing on what Alyona has learned about leadership in a crisis context. What did she realize about her leadership style, the way she makes decisions, etc., when in crisis? Because as we all know, when we as humans are stressed, when we are tired, when we are hungry, when we're under pressure, we can sometimes make terrible decisions. So, how do we avoid that? So I should say upfront, I'm not an expert on crisis management or leading on a crisis. I do know some people who are, and I have learned from them. So, and occasionally I speak on the topic as well, but I don't specialize in it. Crisis leadership is always a competency that many NGOs need and NGO leaders need, and God knows have needed it during the pandemic as well. But some leaders need it more than others. And NGO leaders in Ukraine most definitely have needed this skill. So let's get going with asking Alyona about what she has learned about leadership under crisis. So welcome, Alyona.
Well, thank you so much. Wonderful to be here, and never dreamed to be a crisis leader or a leader in a crisis, but I guess we do what we have to do and learning to live in our new reality.
Yeah, a new reality for sure. Well, you're framing it, you're setting it up very nicely. So let me first to our listeners, let me introduce Alyona briefly. She is, as I said, the country director for PACT in Ukraine, has been for the last 6 years. And I will ask Alyona in a moment to introduce PACT in general and PACT in Ukraine a little bit more. Before playing this role, she was an independent consultant in the field of organizational development and organizational change. And interestingly enough, I am too, so we share that, Alyona. And before that, she was also the country director for Holt International Children's Services. And full disclosure, a long, long time ago, I was an independent consultant for PACT actually in Cambodia. So, Alyona, let's start with our questions. In very practical terms, help our listeners situate you by letting me ask you the question: how has your personal life changed since the war started? And how are you currently living? Where are you living? What are your personal circumstances?
I am in Ukraine. I'm in Kiev.
Okay.
I never left Ukraine, even though we knew it was coming. It's more than a crisis; it's a real war. We, as PACT, as an organization, we put people's safety and security up front. Again, as I said, we understood it was coming. We didn't know when exactly, so we actually allowed our team flexibility. And at that time, back in February, we were about 50 people, 50 staff here in Ukraine. We allowed people to relocate from Kiev to
Mm.
safer places in Ukraine. On the 24th in the morning, when we realized the war is here, we actually allowed people more flexibility, and we ended up having maybe 30% of staff fleeing from Ukraine.
Mm.
Mostly mothers with young children, of course, for the safety reasons. 1/3 of the team relocated within Ukraine, moving west. I relocated from Kiev maybe for a month, but
Mhm.
then came back. How did my life change? I think it's a new
Yeah.
life, as I said, a new reality. We've been, and I personally have been through different stages. again, safety and security of my family and of my team were the two priorities.
Yeah.
And the initial couple of weeks after the full scale invasion, we basically, there were no days and nights. It was like 24/7, and we were
Mm.
just trying to figure out what to do and what can be done. And it was, again, as I said, my family, of course. I have a husband and a son. It was my team of about 50 people and all the partners that PACT has been working in Ukraine with, because they continued to implement, projects. We were worried about their safety and security as well. So there was this like disruption maybe for the first couple of weeks, but then I don't know how, that's still a mystery for me. I'm trying to figure out the secret for Ukraine's resilience and our team resilience in particular. But we were able to get back on track, continuing working,
Well, let's
learning, learning to adjust to this continuously evolving situation.
yeah, you're talking about figuring out step by step and learning. We'll return to that. But let's first situate our our listeners, sorry, a little bit in terms of the programming that PACT does. Tell us in a nutshell, a little bit, for those who don't know PACT, what does PACT globally do? Programmatically, what does it offer? And what did PACT in Ukraine do before the war? And programmatically, what do you as a team, as a program, do now?
We are an international NGO. We celebrated our 50th anniversary last year,
Hmm.
working globally in about 40 countries these days, working with the most vulnerable and marginalized communities, helping them to be heard, capable, and resilient, and helping them to own their own future. We do programming across different impact areas. We're in health, we're in livelihoods and economic growth, definitely working with civil society. But overall, our approach is to work with civil society and governments and private sector, because only by bringing all these three sectors together, you can actually have an impact. In Ukraine, we've had presence since 2008. I
Hmm.
actually joined PACT 10 years ago
Oh, is it?
as a chief of party for one of the projects working on improving HIV service continuum. And then later I took over the country director's role on top of being a chief of party. Before the war, we had 4 projects in Ukraine funded by 2 donors, USAID and Global Affairs Canada. We were in several impact areas, again, working with civil society, working on increasing citizens' engagement and participation. Also having a really nice portfolio of programs around women empowerment and promoting gender equality.
Hmm.
And working in health sector within the HIV service sector in particular. And one could have thought that with the start of the war, the programs may stop or the program portfolio may shrink. We've learned the opposite. Right now, we have 6 projects and we have 3 donors. We're also working with the government of Great Britain right now. We expanded our portfolio of women's programs. We also expanded our health portfolio and are now working in the area of public health, helping Ukraine to strengthen the public health system.
Hmm.
One of the projects actually was written during the war in early March, together with our partner organizations, when we were hiding from shelling and missile strikes. And that really gives you a very special feeling, because that was the kind of like an immediate response to crisis kind of project. Donors were quite flexible and open. They actually allowed a lot of flexibility to the development programs
Okay.
to act as humanitarian responders. And because to be absolutely honest, I was not just surprised, I was shocked that the humanitarian sector was not prepared to respond.
I see.
They're very slow in kind of adjusting their operations. They were not ready, they were not prepared. And it was the development actors who actually proved to be much more proactive and
That is
responsive.
interesting and counterintuitive.
Yeah, and women's organizations in particular. I mean, and we helped them to do what was needed at that time, working in the areas of hostilities, helping internally relocated women and families. I mean, doing all the kind of work that you would expect like UN agencies to do.
Yeah. Interesting. And when you set out talking with me, Alona, you said this is not just a crisis, it's a war. Tell me why you said that.
Because crisis like COVID-19 was a crisis.
Mhm.
But the crisis you can crisis you can frame and you can handle a crisis. When I say it's a war, it's like multiple crises in all dimensions, and the kind of
Mm.
crisis like you troubleshoot here or you address it here and then something else. I mean, today we have missile strikes, tomorrow we have drones. Today we have like power shortages or outages, tomorrow we have something else. You can't
Mm.
figure out a pattern for that kind of ongoing crisis.
Interesting and very, very valid. Yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That helps me understand what you said, and I think our listeners as well, and very true. One more question about your personal state of mind in this war, and that consists of multiple crises. How do you maintain your sanity, your psychosocial well being, if you will, as best as possible?
That's a very good question, because sometimes I just wish I go to bed and then next morning it all disappears and I'm kind of back to my old reality, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. I mean, maybe because I'm a workaholic, which is not necessarily a nice thing, but work really helps. Work
Yeah.
really helps, and because you have to support others and you have to think about so many other things that you have to take care of. Your personal well-being and your personal mental health, you kind of don't have time for that, which is again not a good thing to do, but
Right.
I'm just being honest
But
with
it can
you.
be a, yeah, please, I appreciate your candor. And it can be a coping mechanism in the beginning, but please go on. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also lucky. I have a wonderful family. I have a husband and a son who definitely helped me to get through all these challenges. I have a fantastic team at PACT, and that is huge support as well. And we're also lucky we have what we call a dacha, which is a house in the village
Mhm.
with my garden and with my flowers. And that really helps. We try to go every weekend. We try to
Oh,
go there, and that kind of really gives you some kind of tranquility.
yeah. Yeah, that gives you some tranquility indeed.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can still, despite the war, go there every weekend is I'm sure
Yeah.
is a saving grace. And I definitely relate to what you said in the beginning that initially when we're in crisis, I've had some experience, though not at all comparable with yours, obviously, but work is one of the when everything else is out of control, then work can be something at least where you have some sense of I can still have some agency here, I can have some impact here, when everything else I have no control over. So I appreciate what you're saying. Not everybody understands that.
It's also the kind of work that we're doing, working with communities, working with people. And you see that what you're doing is really, I mean, it has the meaning, it makes sense, it's what
Yeah,
people need. So
yeah,
I'm just lucky, I think, that I have that kind of work
yeah.
that we're doing.
Well said.
And another thing is, which I learned in the past 8 months, is that we really need to enjoy every moment
Mm.
and to enjoy very little things like, oh, the sun is out today, the leaves are changing color, beautiful flowers in the garden, whatever. I mean, even like a rainy day has its own beauty.
Mhm.
I'm a kind of person who likes to plan in ahead. When you talk about your like regular routine work, everything is planned ahead of
Mhm.
time, like roles, responsibilities, milestones, timelines, everything is there. So for me, it's a huge change for me to actually, I can't think about tomorrow. We were doing a planning exercise with the team for our most recent project the other day, and then the air radar alert went on, so we had no choice but to go down in the bunker in the
Yeah.
parking lot. So this is the kind of reality. But
And
I
that's
had a
interesting
very
that you
nicely
say.
structured day, with all the like interactive exercises, etc., and how I will get from A to B, etc. It didn't work out.
It doesn't work. So what you're saying is, as a very what I call planful person, and I'm that way too. It actually there is one good learning for those of us who, like you and I, are planful persons. When again everything in the context is out of our control, we have to yield. We have to give up that sticking to those what we had planned to do, and go with the flow and see how we can get back on the horse and on and on. Yeah, good point. Good realization. So now, Alyona, I want to shift a little bit our conversation to, I want to share with you one by one some research findings this is research that was done on not just nonprofit leaders, but also politicians, public sector, senior civil servants, private sector leaders, about leadership in crisis and what happens to us, our brains as leaders, and our decision making, our styles of leading, etc. I want to run you through them one by one and see to what extent those research findings are relevant in your case or not. They might not be. So let's try a few. So there's some research that says that how leaders respond to crisis depends, first of all, was the crisis a surprise or was it anticipated? So you could think about that in terms of the start of the war. Secondly, is your time horizon short for action? Do you need to take action almost immediately? Or was there some time for reflection? And thirdly, how high is the threat level? And obviously, in the case of when the war started, that threat level, or even when it was very close, that threat level was very high. I'm wondering if these three aspects were they relevant for you at all? So, surprise or anticipation, time horizon short or longer for taking action, and the level of threat.
It is indeed very relevant. And as I said, we anticipated that the war was to start. So we did some contingency planning,
Okay.
and that was very helpful because we were better prepared as PACT, as an organization. In terms of horizon, I don't think it can be one horizon. It's different horizons. Again, I can give you an example. I was coming to office. I was on my way to the office 2 weeks ago when the missile hit the downtown Kiev, 2 blocks from our office. I
Wow.
heard the noise. I was in the car. They were actually 4 explosions. After the first explosion, I didn't react, thinking, But then when I heard boom, 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 I realized that was it. So I turned around and went back home. But on my way home, the first thing I did, we have a WhatsApp group for the team. I sent a message to my team saying, don't come to office. This is your
Right.
short-term kind of immediate reaction. But
Yeah.
then again, we understand that there is an escalation, the level of threat is increasing. So we actually get together as a senior management team, and we make a decision that we stop office attendance for the next week, and we see how the situation evolves. So
Mm.
it's always like short-term, mid-term, and longer-term horizon, because we keep talking about like recovery and development work. We all believe that the war will end, and we do have like longer-term planning, what we will do as a program here in Ukraine.
You do
But
have a
there
good
are
point.
multiple like immediate kind of things you have to do.
Yeah, so you're constantly switching between very short-term horizons and taking action on the very short horizons, some sometimes you have some space for some medium term horizon action,
Yeah,
thinking and action, and sometimes you still try to do long term in
yeah,
case that
yeah.
gets relevant. Yeah, level of threat obviously is existential, right?
Yeah, yeah. And what really scares me is that we're kind of used to it right now. We don't get scared anymore, you know? I mean, when I heard that explosion, honestly, it wasn't like I wasn't frightened, I wasn't scared, I was just reacting,
Yeah,
and that's it.
yeah. That's right. We get used to things that are really quite crazy,
Absolutely.
but the mind, I guess, human beings. There's a good side, a big good side to it, and maybe a not so good side. But the big good side is we adjust a lot faster than we think. But that also means we can get adjusted to things that are very crazy.
That we
Actually,
shouldn't be
that you
adjusted to. Yeah.
shouldn't. Well said. Well said. Yeah, I relate to that as well from my time, long time ago in Cambodia. Um, So let me share a second set of findings that I find really interesting, and that is about how leaders, their worldview, their lens of looking at the world, and their decision making can contract, meaning it can shrink when we're in crisis. So let me give you two examples of that. There's quite a bit of research that says that many leaders as in politicians and in the public sector, senior civil servants, tend to become more authoritative or directive, at least, in their decision making style when they're in crisis or when their organization or context is in crisis, right? So rather than sharing decision making with a broader group, as they may have done before, that shrinks into they themselves making decisions or with a very small group of colleagues, if you will. Another form, a second form of contraction, is that some people no longer seek advice or seek input from a broad set of people, but they only seek input from a very few people. On the other hand, there are also leaders who, when they're stressed, they start consulting people left, right, and center like crazy. I wonder if those two forms of contracting, of both how you make decisions, who's involved in decisions, and who you consult before you make decisions, has that changed during the war?
Not really, to be honest. We do have a country office senior management team, uh, which I mean, one thing that has changed, if we met, let's say on a monthly basis before, and the senior management team, it includes leaders from our current projects. When the war started, we were meeting on a daily basis. We were having a lot of ad hoc meetings. We're now back to the routine when we meet twice a month. If needed, we can definitely convene to make a specific decision. And one thing we do, I think maybe what has changed is that we try to keep uh, more contact with the rest of the team. We're now a team of about 100 people here, not in Ukraine physically, but within the Ukraine program.
Mm-hmm.
And because a lot of people work remotely, not everyone is in Ukraine. It is really important to keep in touch and to maintain some kind of human contact as well.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
also, people are different, people react differently to crisis. What we as an SMT try to do is offer maybe more support than usually, engaging people, involving people, seeking people insights and inputs, and just being human, just that kind of
yeah.
empathy is what everyone needed.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think I realized that actually our country leadership team has a lot to offer in terms of empathy and support
That's
to the team.
wonderful.
Yeah, that was really a wonderful, like, not that I was surprised, but I was pleased to see that.
Affirmation.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So you found what I hear you say is that you don't think your own decision-making style is more directive now, that you make more decisions on your own or with a very small circle of people. And also I hear you say that you still seek input from
Yeah.
an equally broad sense of, okay, that's good, that's good to know. And as we know, research findings are always in this case, what I'm talking about are large numbers of people who were
Yeah.
asked these questions or who were
Mm.
observed through many, many case studies. And that means these are averages and they don't apply
Yeah.
to everybody. And you're telling me that you're not. And that is a very interesting and good and all good. Um, Another thing that I have seen as well as read about is the quality of decision making under crisis can suffer. Doesn't have to, but it can, because the pace of decision making we have to accelerate, obviously. And sometimes this can compromise the quality of decision making. I remember being in a Bridgespan webinar. So Bridgespan is a US based kind of nonprofit training and consulting organization. And somebody said, yeah, we don't want to follow the route of the squirrel who wants to cross the road and makes it across the road for 75% and then turns around, therefore actually increasing the squirrel's chance that they'll get killed by a car, right?
Hmm.
So from that perspective, how how have you tried, Alyona, to avoid making bad decisions when you, as an individual leader, have been under so much stress?
I personally don't believe in good decisions and bad decisions.
Okay,
I
tell me
think I
more.
think I think they're our decisions. And if something doesn't work out, this is learning experience. And maybe this is one of the reasons why we continue to make decisions collectively, because it brings different perspectives,
Hmm.
and it actually increases your chances that the decisions will work well for a particular situation.
Hmm.
But it also gives people the kind of ownership. It's not somebody, me or somebody else, who made a decision that didn't work, right? It's kind of ownership and responsibility for that decision. But again, I mean, just on a personal level, I don't believe that there are bad decisions. I always try to learn and make it differently next time. I mean, if we continue to make the same mistakes, then it's our choice as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Fair enough.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
So
not
it hasn't
everything,
really
not
changed.
it hasn't really changed. I mean, the situation is very dynamic, very volatile. Something that works well today may not necessarily work tomorrow. But
Right.
is it our bad decision, or is it the evolving context?
No, no, it's
I
just
mean,
that.
we were actually thinking of bringing everyone back to Ukraine because the situation was kind of stabilizing a month ago. We were talking to people about the need to come back to Ukraine because it's much easier to work when you're working in person and not online. I don't believe in this like online remote work happy solutions. No, people
Okay.
are human. They need to be together. Our partners are here on the ground. They're delivering programs and services. So we were thinking of bringing the team back. And then on October 10th, we had that missile attack on
Yeah,
Kyiv and across Ukraine. So we reconsidered the decision and we
yeah,
allow people to continue working remotely. But
yeah.
situation may change again and we'll go back to and that's how things work.
Yeah, I had to laugh a little bit when you said you don't believe in virtual or remote teams, because as it happens, and you don't notice, and that's totally fine. But a colleague of mine, Ahmed, and I offer a course on virtual and hybrid leadership
Maybe I
and
should take that course.
team leadership, and I would say that on average, on the whole, virtual and hybrid teams can work. They have their own strengths and weaknesses, let
Hmm.
me say it like that. And face to face or in person teams have their strengths and weaknesses. So that's why you saw
Yeah.
me smile a little bit. But that's outside the context of this particular interview. And I see totally what you said. You said it's more that our context continues to be volatile. So
Mhm.
the fact that we have to change our decisions from day to day does not necessarily mean that they were bad decisions.
Yeah.
We just needed to change them once again. Yeah, understood.
W-
All right.
We're just being
Let,
adaptive,
let's be,
adaptive and responsive. Yeah.
well, yeah, you've been super mightily needing to be adapted for sure. Another thing that that typical advice that you hear to leaders in crisis situation is, you already mentioned, you have to lead with empathy first. So we talked about that, right? And by the way, that empathy is also about yourself. So, make sure that you as an individual leader get what some people call out of the emotional basement. So
Mhm.
when, human beings, when they're under severe stress, they often have, you've heard this, right? The fight or flight response. And some people freeze. That's a third potential response. None of them are necessarily healthy or helpful. So that's something you hear, and that you have to be proactive and anticipate. And you have talked plenty about that. And apply self-care. How do you relate to what I just said around empathy? You want to say more about that? Not being in the emotional basement yourself, and trying to be proactive and anticipate.
Yeah, I mean, it describes it really well, and that's how we have been living through this crisis and through this war. Empathy is definitely the foundation, a very solid foundation that helped me and helped the team.
Mhm.
And I would say that it works both ways. It's not just me, for example, being empathetic with my team. I mean, it works the other way around as well. I actually think this is probably one of the secrets to Ukraine's resilience, is because overall that's part of the culture. Probably people are very, very empathetic. They're very, very supportive, and during the time of crisis, they kind of come together,
Mm.
which could be a surprise, right? It's not like we all understand that we'll want to take care of our own selves first and then someone else, but it's also kind of really a great push to bring people together. And that's what I have observed within our team and our partners and communities where we work, where we implement our programs. I also think that a lot depends on the individual and personality, because we are all different. We have
Yeah.
our strengths and our weaknesses, and there are people who can do like great things, but can't deal with stress or
Yeah.
can't deal with crisis. And there are people who actually thrive on crisis or
Mm-hmm.
thrive on stress. In our situation here today, I think I'm more the kind of person who thrives on stress, not necessarily crisis. I kind of, my internal resources, I don't know how they work, but they get mobilized on their own.
Mobilized.
Yeah, and we have quite a few folks like that on the team,
Mm.
and this is how we get going. Yeah.
Interesting, super interesting. Maybe looking at the time, I want to ask you one or two more questions about communication
Mm-hmm.
to your broader team, now as many as 100 people, communication to PACTs, to your supervisors, to
Mm-hmm.
PACT boards, to PACT supporters, etc. Things that one sometimes what leaders in the, for instance, in the private sector will emphasize, they'll say it's really important as a leader in crisis, during crisis, to be transparent about what you know in that moment and what you don't know, and to be constantly updating, right? As new information comes clear. And also to be transparent about the fact that what you know changes rapidly itself, and so your actions, as you already said, are changing rapidly as well. Is that something that you relate to?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually, I was smiling when you were talking because in one of our programs, we are now actually planning a training on crisis communication for our
Ah,
partners from the public health sector. Uh, and crisis communication is what we as PACT have been doing since the start of the war on February 24th.
yeah.
And communicating more than usual,
Okay.
more often, definitely transparent communication, definitely sharing what we know and what we don't know. Um, I think it gave people more confidence. Even when you say that you don't know how situation will evolve, you don't know what will happen next month, but we were trying to share what we know and
Mm.
go in smaller steps, but still
Mm.
give people some confidence, at least for the nearest future, for something that something tangible, something that they know.
Oh, I love
Uh,
it.
so that really helped. We do, of course, communicate with our PAC DC office, and they've been extremely supportive. And since we are a global organization, we work across the globe in 40 countries. There was a lot of communication coming from other countries to Ukraine team, just expressing support, and that kind of thing. It really matters. It really
Does it?
matters because it gives people, this feeling like we're not alone, we're not forgotten. The rest of the world and the rest of PACT family, they know that we're here. They try to help. They do what they can. So that was really nice. That was really kind of nice, emotional, kind of support.
Yeah.
And again, trying to communicate more often and maybe communicate about minor things as well. And we also try to keep some legacy from our normality. For example, within PACT, we have this annual recognition ceremony when you can recognize your colleagues for their particular contributions or inputs.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it happened just recently, and there is a group of folks in Ukraine office who were recognized by their colleagues. So we're planning next week to have a recognition ceremony. And one may say, like, why would you do that in the midst of the war? But we do that because they're great contributors, they were recognized, and we want those little bits and pieces of normality.
Normality. Yeah, people really, I think I'm so glad you mentioned that. People really crave rituals, and
Mm-hmm.
some things that are rituals of that signal an earlier time and a better time, and as you say, a normal time. That is part of I think of being emotionally intelligent, to understand that. So I think it's wonderful that you do that. I think that is totally the right decision. And yeah, I mean, even if you can think of, so I'm a Catholic by upbringing. If you think about all the rituals that the Catholic Church uses during funerals, for instance, I have felt myself how that can be soothing in a
Mm-hmm.
moment of deep sorrow, right? It's a somewhat
Absolutely.
similar,
Yeah.
yeah. So then I'm going to ask you one more question because we're almost out of time, and that is maybe a little counterintuitive. So sometimes crisis or multiple crises like this terrible war poses to us, sometimes that can also be a ground for innovation, for changing some things and learning some things, obviously, but also changing some things for what PACT Ukraine might be and do in the future. Do you see any useful change that points towards innovation that you think you want to maintain after this terrible war hopefully will be over, and hopefully as soon as possible?
Uh, that's a hard question.
Yeah.
I think definitely, I mean, first of all, I think we've learned to be even more adaptive,
Okay.
and we'll take that with us
Yeah.
moving forward. Um, since we have to work in this hybrid or remote format, we came up with a lot of like digital solutions. I mean, nothing like rocket science, but some kind of new tools, etc. And even though I'm not a fan of remote work, we'll definitely keep some of those like tools and platforms that we had to develop just to be able to continue operate. I think we've learned when I talk about adaptive, we've learned that we can do development work, but we can also be humanitarian aid providers. I hope we won't need to do that in the future, but this is just an example of how we can adjust and adapt our work, building on the current foundation of partners that we have in Ukraine. I think we've learned not to be afraid to do anything and everything.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, some kind of work you never did before. For example, even when we talk about programming, one of the terrible things within this war, when we talk about all kinds of crimes, is conflict-related sexual violence. And what we're learning about it, and this is not the kind of programming that PACT traditionally does anywhere in the world. Working with survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, but we've learned that we can actually do that as well. Whatever the program needs are, we can mobilize resources, we can bring in partners, and we can develop the kind of programmatic response that's needed. This is one of the learnings, and I think this comes from our approach that we really work with communities, we engage the communities, we build that trust within the communities where we work, so we can adapt and respond much faster than someone else, and this is the capacity that I think will keep growing and we'll be using in our programming.
Yeah, that all makes sense. So even
Like
though
connecting the dots, understanding the needs, like firsthand, because we are there in the communities, realizing what kind of expertise and resources we have within the country, what kind of expertise and resources we can mobilize as a global organization, working with different sectors and across sectors. And I think this is what really makes us a reliable partner here in Ukraine.
Yeah, so even though the question was in some ways counterintuitive, it yielded a lot in terms of things you want to retain. So I'm sure that people will listen avidly to this interview. It's been so interesting. If people want to know more about you after they've listened, where should they go, Alyona?
I would suggest people go to PACT's website, pactworld.org. We also have a PACT Ukraine website, PACT Ukraine org UA. I am personally on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook, both PACT and PACT Ukraine. PACT is definitely on Instagram and Twitter and all social media. So just look us
Just
up
all of
there.
those. We can
Yeah.
put those in the show notes. So thank you so much, Alyona, for the tremendous leadership insights you have shared with us today. You obviously are an example to so many NGO leaders across the world who have not had to face what you and your team have had to face. And so I do hope that you and the team stay safe, and that you take as good care also of your own needs, individual needs, as the circumstances allow. Thank you, listeners. If you found this podcast stimulating, then be sure to check out our other episodes as well. You can find them not just on my website, 5oaksconsulting.org. That is the number 5oaksconsulting.org. But you can also find many episodes on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to the podcast or to the YouTube channel, and you'll be the first to know when we drop new episodes. This is Tosca, and I look forward to spending time with you on NGO Soul and Strategy next time.